Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished entrepreneur, consultant, and an author from Sydney, Australia, Mr. Michael Haynes. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Michael is an SME business growth specialist. He's the founder and principal consultant of Listen, Innovate, Grow. He's also an author of a book titled Listen, Innovate, Grow, a guidebook for startups and SMEs to acquire and grow business for B2B customers. So, Michael, before we talk about small and medium businesses and enterprises, tell me about your own journey and what inspired you to become a business growth and go-to-market specialist.
A great question. So my career started very much in big corporate. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I've been living here in Australia now, coming up to just about 25 years. My goodness, time has gone by.
Yeah.
So my career is very much in big corporate, and I've worked in a variety of roles, combining marketing, strategy, customer research, and I worked in various roles in financial services, telecommunications, one of the big management consulting firms as well. It's really in my last role as head of customer research and analysis for one of the big telcos here in Australia that I really got into the B2B space. Very much enjoyed my time. I learned a lot in big corporate, but I also I come from a family of SMB entrepreneurs, and I've always found small and medium businesses to be my people. And so I decided in 2010, I was doing fairly well in my last corporate role, but I decided I wanted to move on and become an independent consultant and really focus in working with small and medium businesses in a B2B capacity.
Fascinating, fascinating. And let me ask you another question. How did all the international experience with large companies shape your approach to working with the small and medium sector?
So, great question. So, learned a lot from working with a lot of the large organizations in, Canada, Australia, the U.S. And so you learn a lot of what are some of the key fundamentals around having to build and grow a business, but having to recognize though that small and medium businesses do not have the same kinds of budgets.
Right.
Some of the methodologies that we use around customer market research that we use in big corporates aren't really applicable. So there are some fundamental principles around understanding, or what I call listening to your market, listening to your customers, and in B2B, our buyers, understanding our competitors, but doing it in a very contextual, appropriate way for small and medium businesses. So you learn a lot of key fundamentals, but it's about being adaptive in terms of approaches, as well as language when dealing with small and medium businesses.
Amazing. Thank you. And what was the motivation to found Listen, Innovate, Grow? And what are some of the kind of work that you do there?
Okay, so the reason why in my last corporate role as head of at the telecommunications company, where I was head of customer research and analysis, that got me in the B2B space. Just having, and some of the projects that I worked on at that company were dealing with the small and medium, the SME segment. So even in corporate, I was already starting to get a lot of exposure working on projects for SMEs. What I was finding was there's not a lot of resources for small, medium businesses in terms of how to grow in a B2B capacity, those sophisticated growth strategies and methodologies. There was nothing to really cater to the small and medium business segment. So recognizing that gap in the market is what prompted me to be working with SMEs. It was really the catalyst why I wrote the book, because I felt there was a big gap in terms of, for B2B resources, all of it was very much catered to large corporates, mid-market, business to government, but nothing catered for those growth SME firms, how to grow, how to do so effectively in a B2B context.
Great response. And based on all the work that you've been doing with the SMEs, what in your view are some of the common mistakes you see a lot of SMEs make when they want to scale up?
Great question. A lot of the mistakes I see is there's not enough of what I call listening, getting that in-depth understanding of the industries, markets, the competitors, as well as the customers, the buyers. I find there's always a gap across those three levels of listening. Listening to you being your organization. People know what they want to do within their organization, but it's at that market level and at that customer buyer level that there's often gaps, particularly in the customer level, because in B2B, it is not enough to understand the organization. Let's say you're an SME IT consulting firm and you want to get into the National Australia Bank. It's not enough to understand the customer organization. You need to know for your particular department. So let's say it's an IT firm specializing in transformation. You need to know for those departments that you're targeting, who are the decision makers? Who are they? What are their priorities? How they buy. So it's getting that granular level of detail around the buyers, around the client organization, I find is often missing. And so it's making sure that we fill that gap of understanding to help us determine what is the best growth strategy roadmap to take the company forward.
Well said. And, you know, when I was reading about you and preparing for my conversation, I was fascinated to read about your AIR or AI-driven go-to-market framework. Tell me about this framework that you've developed.
Okay,
What are some of the
great.
key pillars?
Okay, so just to give a further background and context, so with my business, with my consulting firm, I very much focus on working with small and medium B2B accounting/CFO advisory firm and B2B technology companies. Now, there's a lot of research that has been done by the likes of Forrester, Gartner, the Haynes Research Institute in the United States, looking at the world of B2B professional services, which is really the area that I focus on. And it has been found that the number one thing that our buyers of those professional advisory services are looking for is depth of expertise. Therefore, you need to provide what I call AIR. How do you demonstrate that expertise? You need to provide AIR: advice, insights, and recommendations to your buyers, your decision makers' key priorities and objectives. So by that, I mean providing insights as to the best practices. What are some of the strategies and approaches that you should be using to acquire and retain those clients of CFO advisory services, accounting services, technology services, giving them recommendations as to solution providers, giving them insights on trends and development, broad client buyer needs. These are the kinds of insights and recommendations that you need to be constantly delivering to your decision makers, where and how they look for information. So it's about being very buyer driven, and it's all about providing advice, insights, and recommendations. That needs to be the cornerstone of your business growth / go-to-market strategy.
Well said. But tell me, was there a specific reason you decided to focus only on professional services like accounting, tech, and legal firms? Because the challenges a lot of SMEs face could probably be very similar.
Yes, great question. So what I have found is I decided to, as they say, drink my own Kool-Aid, practice what I preach. And I found I've worked with a whole range of B2B companies in my career. I have very much done a lot of work, particularly in the professional services realm. Done a lot of work with B2B technology companies. I've probably worked with over 500 startup and scale-ups globally. I've worked with a number of accounting and CFO advisory firms. So I decided to niche down and become quite specialized. And I have found niching down makes it easier on two levels. A, it's easier for people to know, what does Michael Haynes stand for? To whom does he serve? And people know Michael's that B2B accounting and tech guy. And it also makes it easier for me to be doing my own go-to-market with respect to what kinds of conferences I should be speaking at, what kinds of publications, who should I be pursuing, not just for clients, but for strategic collaborations, partnerships. So it makes it very easy both for people to know where I fit in the marketplace and for me to do my own marketing and promotion. And it allows me to become an expert, and getting that depth of expertise and being able to demonstrate that I really understand the world of accounting, CFO, the world of B2B tech. Buyers very much like that. They appreciate it. It's like, Michael, you get that. You know how we work. Even though there are commonalities, many buyers, and rightfully so, there are nuances in respective industries. So it's about practicing what I preach to make it easier for myself and for the clients and the communities and leaders that I serve and seek to serve.
Well said. My next question, Michael, is what kind of mindset shift do you think CEOs of the SME sector need to embrace for a sustained period of growth?
Uh, what kind of mindset? I think they need to have a very buyer-driven mindset and really understanding who they're going after and how they now buy and being very adaptive to the changing behaviors of how their clients, of their expectations and how they buy, because that has changed fundamentally over the
Mhm.
past few years. If you go back even to 2020, 2021, the underlying driving question was, um, how do I solve X? How do I go into a new market? How do I, develop a new kind of solution? Now, a key underlying driver is who can help me solve. It's
Mm.
a minor, it seems like a minor shift, but it has big implications for how folks, how your clients, your prospects buy. So it's about being really on current in terms of understanding market trends, understanding buyer trends, and how they have evolved and adapting with that.
Mm.
I also think the approach towards B2B selling very much has to change in line with that. There are still many organizations that want to be stuck in very old, antiquated ways, using what I call the show up and throw up, making the pitch. And that's just not how buyers, particularly in the world of B2B
Yeah.
professional services, that is not how decision makers make decisions and
Mm.
choose their service providers who they ultimately want as partners. So
Mm.
being buyer centric and being very current as to how the markets, how your buyers are operating, I think is a key thing that many leaders still need to come to grips with.
Mm. Well said. And how important is alignment between leadership and client-facing teams when you're developing a B2B strategy?
It is very important that there needs to be alignment with the senior leadership team and your various mid and client facing because an effective growth strategy is cross-functional. Many people think, oh, the growth strategy is a marketing strategy, a go-to-market strategy is a marketing strategy. No, it is not. It is cross-functional. To effectively enter new markets, to scale and grow, you're going to need to involve products, operations, service and support, likely learning and development, because you're often going to be involving executive engagement programs, service delivery. So it's a cross-functional. Therefore, the senior leadership team needs to be aligned as to their growth imperatives and what are the objectives, and getting everyone, all the different functional departments in the organization need to be doing their key roles in conjunction with that overarching strategy. So that alignment
Mm.
between senior leaders and middle and front level, everyone needs to be aligned and collaborating and working together, because it is a cross-functional strategy that
Mm.
you're going to be executing to gain that growth that you seek.
Well said. Well said. Two more questions relating to your work, and then I've got some questions about your book.
Yeah.
The whole world is talking about AI now, Michael. What
Yes.
role, in your view, is AI playing in reshaping go-to-market strategies for SMEs?
Great question. AI can play a very significant role in helping you to do some of that required in-depth industry market analysis.
Mhm.
A lot of that research, that thinking, it is a great tool that you can be using in conjunction with your other sources of insight and information. So it's not a replacement. It is something that you can use as a tool to work with you as you're doing your analysis, as you're doing your strategy planning, to
Mm.
help you develop different scenarios that you may want to test.
Mhm.
So it's a key component of that strategy development. But like I said, it's a component that you use in conjunction with combining it with experience, with other forms of insight. You
Mm.
still need to be getting out and talking, interacting with decision makers, your strategic partners,
Mm.
etc. So it's an effective tool, very powerful, that you really can use combined with your other sources to really help you develop very robust, very effective strategies.
Mm. And my last question, relating to your work, how can SMEs future-proof their growth strategies in a post-pandemic digital-first world?
Great question. I would say to future proof, you need to be doing what I call listening. You need to be on the pulse of
Hmm.
what is going on in terms of those industries and geographic markets, both the ones you currently serve and those that you seek to serve.
Hmm.
And so you can do that through a number of ways. I always tell my clients, your industry and professional associations should be your first starting point because they are the repository of often all that you need. Because within your industry and your professional associations, you get access to newsletters, white papers, webinars.
Hmm.
They're doing events. A lot of your competitors may be part of those industry and professional associations. Those are going to potentially collaborate. So you get sources of information, people that you can network and collaborate with. So you want to be on the pulse, tapping into some of those sources, going to some of those events, interacting. So I always say, with small and medium businesses, we are very lean in terms
Hmm.
of resources and time. I always say your industry and professional association, if nothing else, that should be, you should have membership. And yes, you may need to pay for that membership, but it will serve you well because it is often your one-stop shop for industry insights, competitor insights, getting access to events, being able to collaborate, being able for you to promote your own firm as well.
Hmm.
It is a great starting point for all that you need, for a lot of what you need for
Hmm.
your go-to-market and growth strategies.
Well said. Well said. Michael, I'm going to move to your book.
Yes,
You're the author of a book that is titled Listen, Innovate, Grow, a
yes.
guidebook for startups and SMEs to acquire and grow business customers. I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Mr. Michael Haynes' book. I'm going to do the same. Michael, tell me, what was the hypothesis and the motivation to write your book, Listen, Innovate, Grow?
So again, great question. So again, the motivation was that there was a lack of resources in terms of for startups and small and medium B2B companies as to how they can effectively grow and scale. Because although they are smaller organizations, what it takes to enter new markets, to acquire clients, to
Mm.
increase client spend, to retain and grow them does require a degree of it requires a degree of sophistication of growth strategies. It's
Mhm.
not enough to just be doing LinkedIn ads and just putting out content, some of these tactics. It requires much more robust thinking and execution. I
Mm.
was saying there was a big gap in the market for that.
Mm.
So myself, in conjunction with my co-author, who's also one of my strategic partners, Gareth Chandler in the Evolve Group,
Mhm.
we undertook research to understand, what are effective B2B companies, SME B2B companies doing.
Mhm.
And we found it came down to three core activities of listen, innovate, and grow. Listening to really understand, where to focus, and getting an understanding on three levels: listening to you as in your organization, listening to the market to understand those industry and market insights, listening to the customer, listening to the buyer to really understand who decides what are their priorities, how to buy. So listening tells you where to focus.
Yeah.
Innovation is about business innovation. So those could be incremental or large improvements, changes
Mhm.
across a number of dimensions. It could be product, operations, marketing, service support, organizational. So what are those levers around making those new incremental and or major changes, shifts, and or introductions is
Mm.
about innovating. And then growing is how do you drive and scale, do your growth, new market entries, scaling and doing those growth strategies to really drive the growth. Those are the three key
Yeah.
activities you need to be doing in an ongoing way, in a buyer-centric driven manner.
Mm. Well said. And given the fact that this book is meant for a lot of your own target market, which are the SMEs, what can a reader expect to take away from your book?
They're going to get a lot of practical strategies and approaches on
Mhm.
how they do each of those three key activities.
Mm.
So, how do you go about listening? What are the appropriate ways that small and medium businesses can gain an in depth understanding at
Mm.
that industry, market, and client customer level? So, I come out with very B2B specific approaches, but are very um, applicable for small medium businesses, undertaking things like doing depth interviews, client advisory panels, decision maker summits. So these are all very effective things within their budgets, within their capabilities that they can execute.
Mm.
Different ways to do business innovation across the different elements in terms of product innovation, so new products, coming up with how to design effective bundling solutions, then
Mm.
effective ways to drive growth, manage growth, finance growth. So very actionable, very strategic, but yet very actionable, and all very B2B specific within and the capabilities and what's going to be feasible for small and medium, growing small and medium B2B companies.
Great response. I have time for two more questions. How does your book reflect your consulting philosophy in practice?
It totally reflects my philosophy in practice, because typically listening is often the very first part of really understanding the organization. So where is that IT consulting firm or that CFO advisory firm currently at? What are their strengths? What are their capabilities?
Yeah.
What are their objectives? And then we see, what do we know about the industries, the markets that they're currently serving? What are the dynamics going on? What do we know around their client requirements, their buyer requirements? So we build out that understanding, because there's always gaps. Without a doubt, there are always some gaps. Some minor, sometimes very significant gaps in conjunction relative to their growth objectives, that we need to fill those gaps. Because once we have that clarity, the listening tells us where to focus and tells us how we're going to win in terms of what we need to do in terms of those innovation levers and what we need to do around growth. So the book very much follows my consulting practice, my methodology and perspective of being buyer-centric, being data-driven, but being action-oriented as well. I believe think, plan, execute. We need to have a strategy. It needs to be data-driven, but I'm not into building 100-page PowerPoint decks that often I was doing in the big corporate world. We're small, medium businesses. We need to be actionable. You need to be iterative in this environment as well. So I try to make it data-driven, strategic, but very action-oriented, action-driven, buyer-driven, so that you can get traction, you get momentum, because it's by taking action and momentum, that's how things happen. That's how you get progress and you achieve what you're looking to achieve.
Very well said. And my last question for you. Could you share a success story of one of your clients, and of course, I don't want any names, that illustrates one of the principles in your book?
Let's see. Well, I was working with an IT risk management client last year, looking to do market entry from Australia into the US. And so they had aspirations of going into the US, but not clear how to do so. And so really quickly, it was through doing a fair bit of, I'm going to call that in-depth listening, so in-depth market analysis, talking to clients that they had, both some of the clients they had in the US already, understanding and combined with some of the industry dynamics, and I'm doing the industry analysis to understand the dynamics of chemical risk management. We were able to develop the market entry strategy, which was involving, based on how clients were operating, we identified the leading industry association that we would need to collaborate with to effectively enter the US market. So we ended up setting up some meetings. I flew over to the US, my shortest trip ever, 72 hours, to go from Sydney to the US to accompany the CEO with some meetings with the head of this particular association that we're going to collaborate with. And through those meetings, we then subsequently developed a collaborative growth strategy, market entry strategy for them to be able to enter the US market. But it was by doing that in-depth analysis to understand the dynamics of that industry, the dynamics within the US, speaking to some of the clients to understand how they buy and how do decision makers make their decisions with respect to their risk management providers, that we decided and came up with what the strategy needs to be, which involves strategic collaborating with a key trusted organization that decision makers were using.
Amazing. And on that note, Michael, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been for me. It's almost like an amazing 101 on an SME B2B strategy. Thank you for talking to me about your own journey. Thank you for talking to me at such length about so many different aspects of developing a B2B strategy. And it's interesting that you've chosen to focus on a very small group of people, and I'm sure many, many more viewers and listeners who've listened to our conversation will benefit from all the points that you've given us. Thank you also for speaking to me about your book, Listen, Innovate, Grow. Thank you again, and good luck to you.
Thank you for having me. Enjoy our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.